Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Amateur Radio General Class, session number 24. During our previous session, we had our usual question pool review. We then discussed one-way transmissions. We also looked at what is permissible and restricted communications. We also considered good amateur practice. We talked about transmitter power, peak envelope power or PEP. We also dealt with bandwidth rules and symbol rates. And then we explored volunteer examiners, the Certificate of Successful Completion of Examination or Csce, and we ended with license expiration. When we look at our curriculum, we see that we have progressed quite nicely through all of the topics, and we are at the last section, which is Commission's Rules. Today's session will be our last session for the general class, as we'll be wrapping up this topic today. Just a reminder of the links to take practice exams. And we had no outstanding questions from the last session. However, we did have an errata from one of the slides on the slide deck from the last session. It was identified during the session. And also the slide deck that you would have gotten emailed to you would also have the corrected value. And that value is the last bullet point. The correct symbol rate is 56 kilobaud. I think we had an incorrect 19.6, so 56. So just to emphasize, again, it's corrected in the slide deck. Just, however, to emphasize the point for accuracy. Okay, so as is usual, for the start of our sessions, we go to the question pool and deal with the questions related to the theories discussed in the slide deck during our previous session. And as we have dealt with the theories and explanations, we'll go through the questions at a relatively quick pace. Okay, so let's get straight into the question pool. So for persons who are following on the PDF copy of the No Nonsense General Class License Study Guide, we are on page 91 of the PDF version. And in terms of the PDF itself, it will say page 94. But when you look at it, this was page 90. We're on page 91, so the top of 91. So let's go. Which of the following transmissions is permitted? So this was in reference to one-way transmissions. And the answer is occasional retransmission of weather and propagation forecast information from US government stations. So we had dealt with this in the last session as to what's permitted as far as these one-way transmissions. Okay. Next question in the question pool. Which of the following one-way transmissions are permitted? And we said that we can also transmit Morse code learning sessions, so or blind transmissions or one-way transmissions of Morse code. So that's the answer. Transmissions necessary to assist learning the international Morse code. And in the slide deck for last session, we did show a table of frequencies and times that various Morse code example transmissions are made. Continuing, when is it permissible to communicate with amateur stations in countries outside the areas administered by the Federal Communications Commission. So we dealt with that also, and we said when the contact is with amateurs in any country except those administrations that have notified the ITU, that's the International Telecommunications Union, that they object to such communications. And as we also itemized, we are not aware of any such current restrictions. In the past, there were. In the future, there can be. Moving right along. What are the restrictions on the use of abbreviations or procedural signals in the amateur service? So we did say that if we're using those procedural signals or any abbreviations, we must not have them encrypted. They must not be encoded in such a way that no one can understand them other than ourselves. It has to be clear text. It has to be open. So we say that they may be used if they do not obscure the meaning of a message. So we can use abbreviations and procedural signals once it's clear to all what you mean. You cannot tell secrets. Let's go. Next question in the question pool. What must be done before using a new digital protocol on the air? So that question is related to the whole idea of can we have encrypted messages? And of course the answer is no. It must be understood by all. So if you have a new digital protocol, you must publish it. So the answer is publicly document the technical characteristics of the protocol. Again, it cannot be a secret. It must be known and it must be examinable by all, and all must be able to decode your transmission. Even if it's digital, one must be able to look at it, listen to it, understand it. Must not be a secret. Next question in the question pool. When choosing a transmitting frequency, what should you do to comply with good amateur practice? So we outlined what was considered good amateur practice, and all of these following points are in fact correct. So the first one is you must ensure that the frequency and mode selected are within your license class privileges. Remember we said that the technician class, the general class, the extra class will tend to have different frequency privileges. Well, you need to make sure that you are within your class. We said stay in your lane. Next point, follow generally accepted band plans agreed to by the amateur radio community. So we did show what band plans are. We showed that what section of the bands you can do certain modes and so on. So all of that is good amateur radio practice, following the band plans. And the last point, monitor the frequency before transmitting. You don't want to come on the frequency and just simply start to transmit. You need to listen first, and that's what they mean by monitor before transmitting. Listen to make sure that no one else is transmitting or talking so that you wouldn't cause interference. It's also just good manners. Next question in the question pool. Who or what determines good engineering and good amateur practice as applied to the operation of an amateur station in all respects not covered by the Part 97 rules? Okay, let's dissect this question a little bit. What are they asking us? They say who or what determines. So that's either a person or an agency. Determines what? Good engineering and good amateur practice. So we always say that when we talk about amateur radio, we need to apply good engineering and good amateur practice. But what determines that, or who is the authority in that? And applies to operating your amateur station. But we're saying that it's not covered in the Part 97 rules. So we do have the Part 97 rules that everyone has a copy of. It was distributed in your pack at the start of the session. Of course, it's available in the file share if anyone doesn't have it and would like to take a look at it. And we'd like to encourage you to take a look at Part 97 because all of the rules and regulations are inside of there that we have studied for. And I encourage you to take a look at it. Get familiar with what's inside of there. But if it's not specified, who or what determines what is good engineering and good amateur practice? Well, we said the Federal Communications Commission, that's the FCC, is the authority to determine what is good engineering and good amateur practice. Moving right along. Right, so we have a couple of questions that relate to power output. So we did deal with these in the slide deck. So we'll just move quickly through the questions and what the answers are. You simply need to learn them. We did give a little aid to memoir as to how to remember these answers. We did say that most of them are particular value. So Relatively easy to learn them, but you must memorize. Let's go. What is the limit for transmitter power on the 28 megahertz band for a general class control operator? So of course, to determine that, we used the band chart. We saw what different bands, the different classes of licenses, the technician, the general extra class, and even the other grandfathered classes, such as the novice and the advanced classes, what frequencies they can use, and also what power limits. So again, if you want some guidance as to where we got that from, have a look at the slides in the slide deck or the last week's video recording. We'll have all of that extracted out for you where it is found. So the answer to this question for the 28 megahertz band is 1500 watts PEP, and PEP, remember, means peak envelope power output, 1500 watts. And that's the answer for most of the questions on power in the general class, 1500 watts. So let's go to the next question. The answer is the same, but we're talking now about a different band. What is the limit for transmitter power on the 1.8 megahertz band? So again, they're asking us limit transmitter power. In other words, what's the maximum your transmitter, your transceiver can output when you have switched your radio to the 1.8 megahertz band? Your limit is also 1500 watts PEP output. That's how it's given in the answer in the question pool. But as you know, 1500 watts is 1.5 kilowatts, just FYI. Next question in the question pool, similar question, but they're asking us about a different band. What is the maximum transmitting power an amateur station may use on the 12 meter band? Again, all of that is HF, so we still the same answer, 1500 watts peak envelope power output. So for most of those power questions, the answer is 1500 watts and HF there. But we do have some little exceptions like everything else. So we come to a question where there's a little change to the answer. And you have to learn this one also. And this is a bit of the oddball band also. So what is the maximum transmitting power an amateur station may use on the 10.140 megahertz? So see how they mix it up? And that's why also in this slide deck, we have a little slide showing you the frequency and the wavelength so that you can translate. Remember, we gave also a little rule of thumb that I use. How do you translate? Remember that 300 number from the last session? You just divide and you get what the band is or the frequency is just by dividing that number by 300 by that number, and that could help you. So what is the maximum transmitting power if you're on the frequency 10.140 megahertz? Well, the answer is 200 watts peak envelope power output. So need to learn that 200 watts is the maximum. Remember, that's the band that there's a very narrow range of frequencies. So let's go. Next question. Which of the following is required by the FCC rules when operating on the 60 meter band? Okay, so let's dissect this a little bit. So they're asking us about required by the FCC rules, and it's a 60 meter band. So in the last session, we dealt with some theory and some restrictions when you're operating on 60 meters, a bit of the oddball band there as well. Okay, so let's go. What is the restriction? If you are using an antenna other than a dipole, you must keep a record of the gain of your antenna. So once you're using something other than a dipole, record the gain of the antenna. So that's a restriction or requirement rather when you are operating on 60 meter band. Okay, next question related to the same band. What's the maximum power limit on the 60 meter band? So remember, that's again a bit of an oddball band. So that's the 5 megahertz band where it's channelized. Well, you're allowed an effective radiated power of 100 watts peak envelope power with respect to a dipole. So remember, 100 watts PEP for the 60 meter band. Remember, all the other HF bands we had all the way up to 1500 watts, but notice that we have a couple of exceptions inside of there, and this is one of them, the 60 meter band, where you're limited to 100 watts peak envelope power. Next question in the question pool. What measurement is specified by FCC rules that regulate maximum power output? So we have been saying it all along in the questions. They have been part of the answers, PEP or PEP, and that simply means peak envelope power. So all of the maximum power limits that's specified in those rules, the FCC rules, the power is given with respect to peak envelope power, and we showed a slide as to what peak envelope power is as opposed to, let's say, average power and so on. Okay, moving right along. Next question in the question pool. And when we finish these questions, we'll take a short break. Then we'll come back into some theory. We don't have much theory to do. And unlike other classes where we would normally defer the question pool, give you the chance to go through the theory and then deal with the questions after. Because it's just a few questions, we will deal with those questions in the question pool today. And that's why we say we expect to complete our session, our general class today. All right. Which of the following limitations apply to transmitter power on every amateur band? So let's dissect this question. So they're asking us, what is, okay, Adesh, right, so you dropped off. Okay, so hopefully the recording will stay and you will be able to catch up with any pieces that you missed. That happens. It happens here as well, right? The technology sometimes will have limitations or disruptions. We need to adjust for it. That's why we're also studying amateur radio. That's one of the beauties of it, right? Resilience. Okay. So we dissect this question and they're asking us about a limitation to apply when you're transmitting on any amateur band. What about the transmit power? So we had 1500 watts, 200 watts, 100 watts on different bands. But there's a general rule that applies across no matter what band you're using with respect to power. And we had said, do not use any more than you need to use. So even though the band will specify you can use up to 1,500 watts, that doesn't mean if you have the equipment to run 1,500 watts, that you should be running 1,500 watts all the time. No, you could run 100 watts, you could run QRP, you could run 510 watts. Whatever power is required to make the contact, that is what you should run and no more. So that's the answer. Only the minimum power necessary to carry out the desired communications should be used. Next question in the question pool. What is the maximum bandwidth permitted by FCC rules for amateur radio stations transmitting on USB frequencies in the 60-meter band? Okay, so that's where that slide comes in, where we showed the bandwidth that a USB channel occupies, the bandwidth, and we showed that it's 2.8 kilohertz. So you need to memorize that for USB. Upper sideband on the 60-meter band, it's 2.8 kilohertz maximum bandwidth. Next question in the question pool. Okay, so we're dealing with symbol rates now. What is the maximum symbol rate permitted for Ritty or RTTY radio teletype or data emission transmission on the 20-meter band? So let's dissect this question. So we dealt with this concept the last session. If you need a refresher, just have a revision of the video, or you can look at the slide deck where we talked about what a symbol rate is, and we also showed that for data transmission or digital transmissions, you have a maximum symbol rate that you can use, and that symbol rate is given in baud or transitions. So we are talking about the 20-meter band, and we showed, again, coming up at the end of the slide deck, we have a little trusty template that shows reference to all of the bands, or most of the bands rather, or many of the common bands, whether it's HF, VHF, UHF, what the baud rate is, whether it's lower sideband or upper sideband. So that chart will come in handy. But note that for the 20-meter band, you are restricted to a maximum symbol rate of 300 baud. And we said that that's the reason for that is because the bandwidth on HF is very limited. You have small bandwidth, especially the lower you go in the band or the longer the wavelength, you have very limited bandwidth. And you can't use up all the bandwidth. Remember, we gave the example, if you're driving on the highway, you can't be taking up 3 lanes on the highway, or if it's a 6-lane highway, you can't be taking up 6 lanes. Stay in your lane. You need to stay 1 lane. If you took up all 4 lanes or 2 lanes or how many other lanes your highway has, then what about the rest of us? So stay in your lane. So this is what you're doing here on those frequencies. You're accommodating yourself, but you're accommodating everybody else. You're being considerate, and you're using no more than 300 baud for your symbol rate for Ritty or any digital transmission, or what we say data emission on the 20-meter band. Now they ask us about the 28 megahertz band. What is the maximum symbol rate permitted for Ritty or data emission transmitted at frequencies below 28 megahertz? So they're asking us below 28 megahertz. Well, for everything, every frequency below there, it's 300 baud. So let's go again. Next question. What is the maximum symbol rate permitted for Ritty or data emission transmissions on the 10-meter band? Well, the answer to that, you have a little higher amount, which is 1200 baud. Again, that slide in the slide deck that's coming to the end will show you a reference to where it's 300, where it's 1200, and where's the other values, so that you can have a sort of reference point. So apart from just having to memorize these figures, you have an idea as to where it is, why it is, and show, and you can prove in your own mind and convince yourself that the reason for the restrictions on the lower parts of the band is because of the minimum bandwidth. And as you go higher in frequency, you have much more spectrum that's available to you, and therefore you could have higher symbol rates and you could occupy more bandwidth. In other words, your lanes are wider. All right. For the 10 meter, you're allowed 1200 baud. All right, let's go again. Next question. Next band. What is the maximum symbol rate permitted for Ritty or data emission transmissions on the 2-meter band? So if you remember, the 2-meter band is 144 megahertz, so much higher in frequency. It's the VHF band. So therefore you have a lot of spectrum, a lot more spectrum, I should say, that you can use. And therefore you could use a much wider lane. You don't have to have a narrow lane, you could have a wide lane. And that wide lane is 19.6 kilobaud. And remember, kilo, that's multiplied by 1,000. So that's 19,600 baud compared to 1,200 baud compared to 300 baud. So in the VHF band, the 2-meter band, you have 19,600 or 19.6 kilobaud. Yet a similar question up in frequency again. Right, this time in the UHF portion, well, part of it is in the UHF portion. What is the maximum symbol rate permitted for Ritty or data emission transmitted on the 1.25 meter and 70 centimeter bands? Well, we have much more space, but much more spectrum, and therefore we can use greater bandwidth. Our lane can be even wider on those higher frequencies in the UHF band, for instance. 56 kilobaud or 56,000. And again, at the end of the slide deck, we have a slide that shows reference to all of many of the bands that we can use. What is the maximum symbol rate? So we just need to learn this, and we have a chart that could help you memorize and remember by understanding. All right, next question in the question pool, and we're coming up to the break. Volunteer examiners are accredited by what organization? So that organization, and we give examples such as the ARRL or GLEARC or W5YI. They are different organizations. They're called the Volunteer Examiner Coordinator, or VEC. So if you want to be an examiner, volunteer examiner, and we encourage you to do so once you become licensed, either at the general class level or the extra class level, volunteer to give back to be a volunteer examiner. And the organization that accredits you is called a VEC, Volunteer Examiner Coordinator, such as the ARRL, Amateur Radio Relay League. All right, American. All right, so which of the following criteria must be met for a for a non-US citizen to be an accredited volunteer examiner? So what are they asking us? What must you have, or what must you be to be a VE, a volunteer examiner, if you are not a US citizen? Well, the answer is that person must hold a US amateur radio license of general class or above. So general class, extra class, and so on. Not technician class, all right? To be a VE, you must at least be a general class. All right. Next question in the question pool. What is the minimum age that one must be to qualify as an accredited volunteer examiner? And we said that you must be at least 18 years old. Okay. Next question in the question pool, sticking with volunteer examiners and VEs. All right. What license examination may you administer when you are an accredited VE or volunteer examiner holding a general class operator license? So let's dissect this question. So they're asking us, if you are general class, who can you examine? Or for what level exam can you examine? And we showed a little chart to indicate that general class operators, if you're a VE, you can only examine technician. And of course, if you are an extra class, you can examine all levels. You can examine extra, you can examine general, and you can examine technician. So that's the answer here. They're asking us about the general class. If you are, who can you examine? You can examine for the technician level only. Next question. Which of the following must a person have before they can be administering VE for a technician class license examination? So just a similar question like the previous one, just in a different way. They are sort of asking us the same thing. So they're saying, if you're going to administer for the technician class, what must you have, or what class of license must you have? Well, you must have a general class or higher, and you must also have your VEC accreditation. So that's what you must be or must have to be able to administer a technician class examination. Okay, next question. Which of the following is a requirement for administering a technician class license exam? Well, the answer is there must be at least 3 VEC, Volunteer Examiner Coordinator, accredited general class or higher VEs must be present. So if you are administering a technician class license exam, you must have 3 VEs. They must be accredited by the VEC, and they must all be at least general class, or we say general class or higher. Those are the rules and the regulations for volunteer examiners. Okay, next question in the question pool. How long is a Certificate of Successful Completion of Examination, or Csce, valid for exam element credit? Let's dissect this question. What they're basically asking you is, when you sit the exam, whichever exam it is, and you pass it, you get this thing called a Csce. The question is, how long is that valid for exam credit? The answer is 365 days. All right. Of course, in Trinidad and Tobago, make sure you hold on to that certificate. All right. Yes. Next question in the question pool. On which of the following band segments may you operate if you are a technician class operator and have a Certificate of Successful Completion of Examination, or Csce, for general class privileges? Let's dissect this question. What are they really asking us? So you are a licensed operator, you have a technician class at the moment, but you have sat and passed your general class, but you have not yet been assigned a general class operator privilege. You are technician class, but you passed the general class, so you have your certificate. What can you do? Are you still restricted to only using the technician class band segments? The answer is no. You can be on any general or technician class band segment. That's because you are a technician class, you have a call sign, but you passed the exam for general, and therefore you can use your technician class band segment, which you always had as a technician, but because you passed, you can now use the general class segment, even though you're not yet a general class according to the database. All right. The next question will clarify that a little further. When must you add the specific identifier AG, or in phonetics Alpha Golf, after your call sign if you are a technician class licensee and have a Certificate of Successful Completion of Examination, or Csce, for general class operator privileges, but the FCC has not yet posted your upgrade on its website? Let's dissect this question, similar to what we were asking in the previous question. So You are a technician class licensee. That means you're a technician class operator. You have your call sign for technician class. But you sat the exam for general and you passed. And you have that certificate. But the FCC has not yet received that from the VEs. And therefore, they do not reflect on the FCC ULS database that you are a general class. If you look there, you will still see you appearing as a technician class. But we said in the previous question, you can actually use the general class segment of the bands as if you were a general class. But what you have to do is you're still a technician class, but you can use Alpha Golf or AG after your call sign. State your call sign and then you say AG, and then that is what allows you to use your general class. So we say whenever you operate using the general class frequency privileges, you have to use the AG. It's like a suffix, they say after the call sign. So you use AG after if you're going to use any of the privileges that require general class. Okay, moving right along. Right, 2 more questions before we take a break. Who may receive partial credit for the elements represented by an expired amateur radio license? So last session we said that when your license has expired and you have not renewed, of course you have a little grace period of 2 years. If you have not renewed and then you let that grace period of 2 years elapse and you no longer have a license and your expiration period has passed and your grace period has passed, but you still want to become licensed. We had said that before you actually had to go and resit every single exam to the level that you want to get at. But if you had an extra class and you have your license has expired and your grace period of 2 years, and we said during that grace period you can't transmit, it's just that during the grace period you could renew without having to take the exams again. But if that grace period is passed, you have to take an exam, one exam, and that's the technician class exam that you take. So if you had an extra before, it expired, the 2 years grace period passed, so you no longer have a license and you want to renew, as long as you can prove that you had that extra class before, you just need to take the technician class and boom, you're back as an extra class. So they're asking who may receive partial credit for the elements expressed by an expired amateur radio license. The answer is any person who can demonstrate that they once held an FCC issued general, advanced, or amateur extra class license that was not revoked by the FCC. So that's the other provision. It must not have been revoked. You can get credit for it and you just simply, and the next question will speak to it. So let's go straight to it. What is required to obtain a new general class license after a previously held license has expired and the 2-year grace period has also passed? What is required? Well, we said it just now. The applicant must pass the current Element 2 exam, and the Element 2 is what gets you the technician class. So even though you were general class before and you want to get it back, it's expired, your grace period has elapsed, and you want to get back your license, you just need to take the technician exam, or also called the Element 2 exam. So, now is the time for us to take a short break. Please get up, take a stretch, and maybe have a bathroom break, get some water, and we will join you right back in approximately 2 minutes time. Okay, everyone, welcome back. So as we were talking about licenses, expiration and grace periods and resitting exams, please, once you have become licensed, try not to let our licenses expire. All right. So we'll go straight into the theory for this evening's session. It's not much material to cover. So right after we cover the theory, we'll go straight back into the question pool related to the theory that we discussed this evening. And that is what will be the end of our session, and we'll do a wrap up. Okay. So we're talking about third-party traffic. Now, persons who would have attended the technician class would find this to be quite familiar because the information is pretty similar to what we had discussed during the technician level when we discussed third-party traffic. But what exactly is third-party traffic? So if we were to look at the diagram at the bottom, we see that there are two amateur radio operators, two licensed hams, this person here and the other person here. And they're both in, let's say, two different locations. And for our purposes, we are showing that those persons are actually in different countries. So this person here is located in the United States, and this other person is, let's say, it could be in the Caribbean, could be in Europe, could be anywhere else. So we have these two hams here that are licensed, and they can normally talk to each other, have what we call QSOs, conversations either via voice, or they can use digital modes and send messages between each other. So they're both considered to be control operators at the location that they are in. And a third party is another person, usually unlicensed, a person who is not licensed, usually. And we consider that person a third party. Could be an unlicensed person. And as hams, we can in fact pass that third party traffic. So that person will be by us. They come by us, or they can be in touch with us, and we want to pass that message on to another person in another country. As a ham, we need to be aware of what types of traffic that we can legitimately pass and what types of traffic are considered to be no-no. So as a ham, that third-party traffic can only be something related to amateur radio, something of a personal nature, or something to do with disasters or emergencies. We cannot do traffic of a commercial nature, for example. So we need to be aware that if we are passing messages from a third party to another country, and remember, we are doing exams based in the US. So anytime we go through this material, we need to always be aware that we are talking as from a US or United States perspective. So persons who are not within the US may say, well, that doesn't exactly apply in the same way. The concept is the same, but we are talking strictly from a US perspective. So we need to bear that in mind. So you are not able to pass any messages other than amateur radio traffic, remarks of personal nature, or messages relating to emergencies or disaster relief. So we need to learn this for the exam because it will be a question that you will be asked. If you're passing third-party traffic, another country, you have limitations or restrictions. And this is the bullet point here that speaks to what we just discussed. We also need to be aware is if that third party is a person who held an amateur radio license and they have been disqualified or their license has been reinvoked, or sorry, I say again, their license has been revoked and it has not been reinstated, then that person, that disqualifies them from participating in what we say stating a message over an amateur radio station. So if that third party used to have a license but it was revoked and not reinstated, then that disqualifies that bit of traffic from being legitimate. So we need to be aware of that, and that's a restriction in terms of third-party traffic. So this is a little diagram that will help us understand one amateur radio talking to another amateur radio operator, and we are passing messages to a third party or from a third party. Now we come to a topic that we had discussed before, harmful interference, but we have some very specific things that we need to discuss in terms of our licensed amateur radio status. And we need to be aware that once we have an amateur radio license, we need to take very specific care or very specific steps to avoid causing harmful interference to other users or facilities. And there are three very specific things that we need to be aware of for the exams, and those three very specific things we need to pay attention to. So as a licensed ham, we have very specific steps to take to avoid causing harmful interference. One, when we are operating within 1 mile of an FCC monitoring station. So there's a picture on the bottom here. This doesn't probably exactly look like this, but this is just a picture of a building that the FCC might be in, right? So consider this an FCC facility. It's a monitoring station where they will be monitoring radio frequency. And if you are within 1 mile or you're known to be within 1 mile, you need to take very specific steps to not cause harmful interference to that facility. Also, the second one would be if you're operating in a band where the amateur service is secondary. So if you may recall, we said on some bands, amateur radio operators are primary on those bands, meaning that we have priority, we are the user there. However, some bands, we are secondary, meaning that we can use it, but we need to give way to if the primary user shows up, or if they start to come and talk or transmit or occupy or utilize that frequency that we are secondary on. We need to give way. We either need to shift frequency to another frequency that primary user is not using, or we need to stop transmitting altogether. That's when we are secondary. So we need to be very, very careful that we don't cause harmful interference when we are operating on those bands that we are secondary. An example would be the 60-meter band. We are secondary there, and we have to take good care to avoid causing harmful interference. That's sort of what we just really need to know for the exam. Take good care to avoid causing harmful interference in these conditions. The last condition, when you are transmitting spread spectrum. So as an amateur radio operator, you have different modes that you can use. You have single side band, you have AM, you have FM, and you can also do signaling that is spread spectrum. So in the technician class, we did go through what spread spectrum is. So we'll do a quick review here using this diagram. So there are different types of spread spectrum. You have direct sequence, you have frequency hopping, and so on. But what we need to know essentially is that usually when we are transmitting as an amateur, we are transmitting usually on one frequency or a little range of a frequency, occupying just a piece of bandwidth here. But with spread spectrum, you transmit on multiple frequencies in a range. So I'll transmit on this frequency, then I'll transmit on this frequency, then I'll shift to this frequency and transmit, then I'll shift to this frequency and transmit, then I'll shift to this frequency and transmit, and so on and so on and so on. And that is done in an algorithm. So your transmission actually occupies a fairly wide range of frequency, only one at an instantaneous moment in time, but you're actually occupying a range of frequencies. So you might be wondering, but wait a minute, what mode does a ham use that could use spread spectrum? So we haven't talked about it in any of the other modes that we have done, the digital voice modes, the digital HF modes, the other analog modes. We haven't talked about us bouncing our frequencies all over. So what mode is there a legitimate cause to use spread spectrum? Again, this is not required necessarily for the exam, but it's good for us to know. One of the upcoming slides, we will be talking about mesh networking, which we also discussed in the previous technician level. And that mesh networking is using part of the spectrum that is close to the ISM, industrial, scientific, medical part of the bands, or what we call the license-free bands. And in this case, Wi-Fi uses spread spectrum. If you ever monitor Wi-Fi signal, you'll see it's bouncing all over the place. It's using a range of frequencies, but it's transmitting here and then transmitting there and transmitting somewhere else and bouncing all over. That's spread spectrum, where your transmission occupies a range of frequencies, one little frequency segment at a time, and it's going all over the place and so on. So if you are using spread spectrum emissions, or your station as an amateur radio operator, you're doing spread spectrum, you need to make sure you don't cause harmful interference to other users. So we're coming to a concept of automatic control. Again, we dealt with automatic control in the technician level. As a matter of fact, session 16, the last session of the technician class, if you need a review or revision of the different types of control, local control, remote control, automatic control, please review session number 16. That could be a little bit confusing even for licensed hams. You know, what is what? What is local control? What is remote control? What is automatic control? It could be a little bit confusing. So please review the session. But what we can say for now, perhaps, is that just a refresher, local control is when the control operator or the ham can directly manipulate the operating amateur station. In other words, you're sitting right in front of the radio. That's local control. And remote control is when the operator is indirectly manipulating. In other words, you may be remote, you may be somewhere else, probably through a control link, probably a radio link, or maybe a telephone link or an internet link. You're not right there in front of the radio. That is considered remote control. You're away from the actual radio, but you're still manipulating it. That's remote control. And then we have automatic control, which is that no one is there. The computer or some electronics is manipulating the transmit and so on. So that is automatic control. So in other words, you don't have a control operator necessarily present at the control point. And an example of automatic control is repeaters. A repeater that's on a tower or on a hill somewhere, and you have your handheld or mobile station or base station, and you're going through that repeater. That repeater, in a way, is a sort of automatic control. Nobody's actually there. No control operator is there physically. But we are talking about okay, folks, sorry about that. I think we dropped off. Yeah. Okay. Right. So, folks, sorry about that. I think we had a glitch in the matrix. I'm not sure where we dropped off. So if you can guide me if Did we complete harmful interference? Did everyone hear the harmful interference section? Or I need some guidance from someone. Okay, so we completed harmful interference and we went on to automatic control. So should I restart the automatic control discussion? Okay, so persons are saying yes. All right, we were talking about repeaters. Okay, great. So I'd reached the point of discussing repeaters. All right, sure. So I'll pick up from there. So we were talking about automatic control generally, meaning that a person is not present. You don't have a control operator when there's automatic control. But in digital modes, we can also do automatic control for digital modes. Now, digital modes, if you recall, we said that a digital mode is any time an amateur radio operator uses a computer to connect to a transceiver and send information and messages using that computer. So the computer generates the tones, and the tones go to the radio, the transceiver, and the transceiver transmits to the air the radio signals, and of course vice versa. The incoming radio signal is received by the transceiver and sends those tones to the computer, and the computer will interpret and display on screen an interpretation. It will decode those signals and display it. So that's how we have the two-way transmissions using digital modes. So let it not be lost upon us. Anytime we talk digital modes in our discussion as amateur radio operators, it's usually a computer that is connected to a rig. We did say there are some radios or transceivers that will have a built-in computer and will generate those tones and so on. But generally, we are using a computer. So for automatic control on the digital modes, there are some rules that we need to be aware of so that we could legally use automatic control. So the first rule that we need to be aware of when we're doing automatic control, and just remember what automatic control is. It's a control operator not being present. It's your computer that's doing the transmission automatically, for instance, or the radio automatically transmitting. So we need to be aware of some rules and regulations in respect to automatic control for digital modes. On the right-hand side here, we have a little diagram. You should be familiar with this by now. We have shown this a couple times, different versions of this diagram to show the amateur radio frequencies that we have access to when we become licensed amateur radio operators. We're showing it in terms of frequency, and we're also showing it in terms of the wavelength. So we need to know that we can transmit on the bands, the amateur radio bands, automatic control. However, we need to be aware that the frequencies that we use are restricted in terms of where we can do automatic control. We cannot just go on any amateur radio band and do automatic control. There are bands that we can, and there are sub-segments or limited segments of some bands that we can do automatic control. In some bands, we can do it across the band, and in some bands, we could only do it in pieces of the band. That's the point. And that's why we have up this little diagram here and this line that sort of demarcates. So what we are saying, that any frequency on the 6-meter band and higher frequency or shorter wavelengths, so read that as any frequency from here go down, and notice we are increasing in frequency, but we are also decreasing in wavelength. So any frequency below this yellow line, we can do automatic control anywhere on the band. Of course, it has to be within the band plan, right? So you can do automatic control here without a doubt. However, if you are wanting to do automatic control on a frequency above the yellow line here, meaning on these HF frequencies, you cannot do it in any and every part of the bands. That's what you need to know for the exam. You have limited segments. Now, you don't need to learn this for the exam, but we like to give a little something extra in the class. So when we say limited segments of some HF bands, you can do automatic control. these HF frequencies, some people might ask, well, we're saying limited segments. So what are those limited segments? Well, right at the bottom here, taken right out from part 97, is actually the frequency ranges that it's permissible to do Ritty or any of the other data emissions on. So we say here you could do it on the 6 meter or shorter wavelength. So anything below this line here, you can do automatic control, but above the line here, you can't do it on any and every frequency. These are the frequency ranges here, and we have it so 28.120 to 28.189 megahertz, and so on and so on. This is just here for your reference to show when we talk about the limited segments of some of the HF bands, what it actually means. But for the exam, you just need to know it's limited segments. You don't need to memorize those frequencies. But of course, as a licensed ham, you need to know what those frequencies are so that you don't flout the rules and regulations. But for your exam, you don't really need to learn it. I encourage you to pay attention to it. But in terms of studying for the exam, you just need to know it's limited segments of these bands that you can do automatic control on. There's another regulation that you need to learn and be aware of. And that is, if you are going to be doing automatic control outside of the automatic control band segments, meaning that you typically will not be able to do automatic control, but you are doing automatic control to another station, you need to be aware that the station that is initiating the contact must be under local control or remote control. In other words, that station cannot itself be operating under automatic control. So the other station may be automatic control, but the station that initiates must have a control operator, either local or remote. And you may recall we started the discussion a little while ago, sort of refreshing what we did in the technician class, which is a local control. That is where you have somebody who is actually sitting in front of the radio. That's essentially what it means. The operator can directly manipulate the amateur radio station. Or remote control, meaning that the operator can manipulate but remotely or indirectly. So that person is either using some sort of radio link, or it could be an internet link, but the person is there, and that person is a control operator. They're just remote. And that person, for it to be a valid communication using digital under automatic control outside of the automatic control band segment, you can communicate with another station that's automatic, but the person who is initiating must be there. That control operator must either be local, right at the radio on the computer, or remote, meaning that they have control of it even though they're not physically in front of the radio or that computer. These are the regulations that you must learn for automatic control using digital modes. All right, so believe it or not, this is the last subtopic that we have here in our slide deck. And after this, we'll just have that little slide that I promised you as the reference point. And we will go through the question pool questions related to these couple of subtopics that we did this evening. So that's why we will be coming to a close our general class session this evening. So last topic, again, another topic that we discussed during the technician level. So just some little nuances in respect of that. So again, I encourage you to refresh yourself on the technician level if you want some backdrop. However, mesh networking is utilized by amateur radio operators. But what exactly is a mesh network? So if we were to look on the right-hand side here of our diagram, we will see routers. This may be familiar to persons, wireless routers or Wi-Fi routers. Back in the day, we had Linksys routers that look like this, but of course, routers look all sorts in form and fashion now. Sometimes they're integrated with modems from internet service providers. But the point is, these are wireless routers. You have the other types like the Ubiquities that look like little tall sort of posts instead of with antennas external. It's antenna and Wi-Fi router built in. You can't see the antenna at all directly. Here you can see two antennas sticking out. But the point is, these are wireless routers. And as hams, what we can do, we can repurpose these commercial wireless or Wi-Fi routers. And we are able to put customized firmware on these routers. And when we do that, we have a benefit as an amateur radio operator in that we can use frequencies that commercial persons or persons who are home users will not be able to use, and we could also run at a higher power output than they can use. So that's a benefit of your amateur radio license. You get access to extra pieces of spectrum, and you're also able to run higher power. Why? Because you are trained. You know how to avoid causing harmful interference. But a mesh network is one router sees or can see another router via the radio link, and this router can see another router via the radio link, and so on. And you may have this router that can see 1, 2, 3 routers, and therefore traffic that is communicated can go from one of these routers to another router via multiple modes. So if this router were to break down or something were to happen to it, traffic or data flow from this computer connected to this router can go this way all the way to this router here, or to a computer that's connected to this router. So this computer wanting to communicate with this computer have multiple paths that it can use. So it's very resilient, meaning that it can suffer from one of these routers going down. If this router were to go down, guess what? The path that this computer's communication can take can be this way, this way, this way, this way, and then to this computer. If this router were to go down, let's say this one here, then the pathway could be this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. So this is the concept of a mesh network. It's self-healing, it's very resilient, and as hams, we can set up routers like this at our base station locations. And if we have other hams in the metropolitan areas or the city areas that are close by, and we are able to relay using the radio frequency in the Wi-Fi part of the spectrum. And this is considered a mesh network. And there are two basic ones. We have the broadband hamnet network, sometimes called HSMM, and also we have the AREDN network, which is another network that hams use to flash these the sort of customized firmware onto these wireless routers. The wireless routers will come with stock firmware that allows it to be used for Wi-Fi. So you bring this home, you plug it into your internet service provider, and then you connect your laptop or your phone, and you're using Wi-Fi. That is the traditional use of one of these types of routers. But as a ham, you can repurpose it and flash or write custom firmware, rewrite the software inside of the hardware, and let it do your bidding as an amateur radio operator. You have to put your call sign inside of there, and when that firmware goes on, you configure it accordingly, and it uses an extra piece of the Wi-Fi spectrum that the commercial ISM people don't have access to, and you can run a higher power. An example of that, for example, let's say the commercial users or the home users might be able to run this at maybe maximum 1 watt. As a ham, you have a license that allows you to run as much as 10 watts. If this could have actually done 10 watts, that is, right? But the point is that you could run higher power output because you are trained, licensed, and you can experiment with that higher power. And these routers allow for wide area communication or a communication across a larger geographic area. And the beautiful thing about using these Wi-Fi nodes as an amateur radio operator, you get relatively high speed, certainly higher than the speeds traditionally available in amateur radio, the amateur radio world. So this is pretty good for resilient and disaster communication to provide high-speed networking. It's just one of the ways that hams can build resilience with communications. So there are a couple of things that we need to learn for exams in relation to mesh networking in amateur radio. So the 13 centimeter band is actually the 2.4 gigahertz band. And that should sound very familiar to many of us because we'll recognize that 2.4 gigahertz is where Wi-Fi resides in the spectrum. So the 13 centimeter band is where hams have privileges as part of your license. But you need to know that when you're communicating using those frequencies as a ham, you cannot directly communicate with the non-licensed Wi-Fi station. So you cannot somehow interface that directly to another Wi-Fi signal. That Wi-Fi signal that you're using, or the signal in the Wi-Fi part of the spectrum, the 13 centimeter band, is to communicate with other routers that's running those same protocols as you, whether it is BBH and or whether it's HSMM or AREDN, one of those you are able to communicate with another ham. You cannot somehow communicate directly from your router to another Wi-Fi router on that protocol. You must use the amateur radio protocol using those same frequencies and power limits. And below here, we have a little diagram showing you, for instance, what the commercial user or the home user has access to. So this is the 2.4 gigahertz band, the ISM band, and this red arrow here shows you where the Wi-Fi resides, and the green arrow shows you as a ham what frequencies you have access to. So notice it overlaps, but notice you have something extra. You have a piece of spectrum here that Wi-Fi or the traditional Wi-Fi users don't have. So therefore, that part of the band will be clear for you. You would not get interference from these users here per se, because you have a clear spot. Also, this part of the spectrum as well, you also have clear, because the Wi-Fi users don't have access to this. So we say that in no part of the 13 centimeter band may an amateur communicate directly with non-licensed Wi-Fi stations. So you need to know this for the exam. You also need to be aware as a ham that the maximum peak envelope power output that's allowed for spread spectrum redata is this Wi-Fi part of the band. Because when you are doing this communication, it's also spread spectrum that you're using for your communication here. Your maximum is 10 watts. You need to learn that for the exam. So remember, said as a ham, you have 10 watts. The commercial or the home users, they can run, I think, a maximum of 1 watt, no more. So look at that. Look at the benefit that you're getting as a licensed amateur radio operator. You get to run 10 watts. Also, we need to be aware that we have said it before, that hams are not allowed to encrypt messages. We must always be in clear text. Someone must be able to examine that message and interpret it. We cannot pass a secret message or anything like that. You cannot encrypt. So that's the last bullet point here, that under no circumstances are messages that are sent via digital modes exempt from Part 97 third-party rules that apply to other modes of communications. So we need to be aware that all of these rules that we have as hams also apply when we are doing digital modes using mesh networking and so on. We cannot send third-party messages that are prohibited, like the ones that we mentioned before. So all rules must be applied no matter what the mode that we are using. We simply cannot disregard those regulations just because we are now using mesh networking and 13 centimeter or 2.4 gigahertz, that we could somehow now, oh, hey, what? We can disregard those third-party rules. No, we cannot. We cannot somehow now encrypt our traffic because it's on this band. No, we cannot. We have to be in clear text. But we do have some benefits, 10 watts of power, and we are also able to do this special firmware with resilient networking as an amateur radio operator. And for persons, maybe you cannot see it here clearly, the Wi-Fi spectrum that is typically used by our laptops, our phones, whether we're in office or at home, it goes from 2.2401 to 2478 if we are talking about the Americas. But of course, with Japan, they have all the way up to 2495. That's that part of the spectrum here. But as a ham, we have 2390, which is lower than 2.401. 2390 to 2450. So that's the part that we have. And we also have this little extra piece here, 2300 to 2310. So those are the frequencies that we have as a benefit as our amateur radio license. So I did promise you this trustee diagram once again. This diagram that shows us some of the amateur radio frequencies that we have access to. Again, it depends on the class of license that you have. It certainly doesn't show all of the amateur radio frequencies. We stop at 23 centimeters. We didn't put in the 13 centimeter and the other bands. But it gives you a little reference point of the frequencies matched with the wavelength. It also shows you what is MF, medium frequency, which is what is HF, what is VHF, what is UHF. We also added in here for you, sometimes people say short wave. Well, believe it or not, this part of the spectrum here is short wave. Below that is medium wave, and below that is long wave. So anytime you wanted to know what was short wave, well, essentially short wave is sort of part of our MF and HF spectrum. So, you know, when people talk about short wave, I mean, you have shorter wavelengths, but back in the day, you know, you had long wave and medium wave, and this was short in those days, right? But you have even shorter now. So just for your purpose, and also where you can use lower sideband, typically by convention or good amateur radio practice, where you can use upper sideband. And then the symbol rates, where you're limited to 300 baud. Notice, because of the lower frequency, the longer wavelength, lower frequency, very little limited bandwidth, you are using 300 baud maximum, stay in your lane, narrow lanes. And as you go up in frequency, notice we go to 1200 baud, you have a wider lane. When you go up even higher in the frequency spectrum, you have more bandwidth available. You're going to 19,600 or 19.6 kilobaud. And as you go even higher, you're allowed 56,000 baud. And anything above that, we say it's unlimited, really. And that is a reference diagram that I trust and hope will help put things in perspective as you have to learn all of these things. It's a very handy chart because as ham, sometimes we say the 20-meter band. What's the 20-meter band? That's from 14.0 to 14.35. Remember the little rule of thumb I said 300. If you divide 300 by 20, you get 15. So approximately that. So 300 is the number that I use in my mind if I'm having any difficulty translating from the wavelength, the length compared to the frequency. Or if I have a frequency and I want to know what wavelength that is, I take it and take 300 and I divide by whatever the number is and I get the other number. So just a little way to remember if you have any difficulty. But this is the chart. This is the 160-meter band. You know, it's 1.8 to 2.0 megahertz. So this hopefully will help when we talk, and the question pool will ask you on the 20-meter band, so on, so on. So what's the 20-meter band? You can look at this and see what the 20-meter band, or if they say the 6-meter band, well, this is where the 6-meter band is, 650 to 54 megahertz, and so on and so on. So folks, we will now go through the as quickly as we can, the question pool questions, not many, that's related to the questions that we just discussed. So we don't have to come back with another session. So let's go. All right. So we are back to our trustee no-nonsense general class license study guide. And we are on page 97. So it's just 2 pages, just a few questions, and then that will be the end of it. We'll begin our wrap-up. So let's go. What types of messages for a third party in another country may be transmitted by an amateur station? Well, we just discussed that. We said only messages relating to amateur radio or remarks of a personal character, or messages relating to emergencies or disaster relief. So we just gave that in the theory section. That's the type of messages that you can pass for a third party in another country. Next question in the question pool. Which of the following would disqualify a third party from participating in stating a message over an amateur station? So we discussed that. We said that the third party's amateur license has been revoked and not reinstated. That is actually what will disqualify a third party's information from being passed or stated over amateur radio. Okay, so please try not to get your license revoked or disqualified. Next question in the question pool. Which of the following conditions require a licensed amateur radio operator to take specific steps to avoid harmful interference to other users or facilities? So we just discussed all of those 3 things that we have to take into account. 1, when operating within 1 mile of an FCC monitoring station. So 1 mile FCC monitoring station. If you're closer than that, you need to take specific steps to avoid causing harmful interference to them. Also, if you're when using a band where the amateur service is secondary, right? So you have to take specific steps to avoid causing harmful interference then also. And lastly, when a station is transmitting spread spectrum emissions. So if you're doing spread spectrum, take all steps to avoid causing harmful interference to other users and facilities. Okay, next question. On what band, or I say again, on what bands may automatically control stations transmitting Ritty, RTTY, or data emissions communicate with other automatically controlled digital stations. So we just dealt with that. We say anywhere in the 6 meter or shorter wavelength bands and in limited segments of some of the HF bands. So remember that. We said, remember where we had the yellow line drawn? We showed anything below that, you can do automatic control using data emissions like Ritty and any other of the digital type modes. But limited segments of some of the HF bands, and we showed what they were actually. You don't need to learn them, but that's what you need to learn for the exam, that it's limited sections of the HF bands. You can do automatic control, right? So remember automatic control, that's where you don't have a human present. The control operator is not there. You can do digital on the other parts of the bands in the band according to the band plan, but you need a control operator to be either remote control or local control. Next question. Relatedly, what is required to conduct communications with a digital station operating under automatic control outside the automatic control band segments? So we said for that to happen, the station that is initiating the contact must be under local or remote control. So if you are the one initiating the contact, you have to either be at the radio with the computer, or you are away from that radio or computer, but you're connected via maybe an RF link or maybe the internet. You're doing remote control. You cannot be absent or asleep or somewhere else. You have to be present locally or remotely if you're initiating automatic control. In the part of the band, of course, that does not permit automatic control by itself. Okay, so next question. In what part of the 13 centimeter band may an amateur station communicate with non-licensed Wi-Fi stations? So that's a trick question. In what part of the 13 centimeter band? So remember, the 13 centimeter band is the 2.4 gigahertz band, also called the Wi-Fi band. In what part of that band can you, as an amateur station with your license and your frequency privilege, communicate with non-licensed Wi-Fi stations, which is everybody else? Trick question, because the answer is no part. You cannot do it. Okay, next question in the question pool. What is the maximum PEP, peak envelope power, output allowed for spread spectrum transmissions? What is the maximum? So we had said that the home user, the commercial users, they are limited to 1 watt. But as a ham, you're allowed peak envelope power 10 watts. Look at that. Wonderful benefit as an amateur radio operator. Folks, we have come to the last question in the question pool. Under what circumstances are messages that are sent via digital modes exempt from Part 97 third-party rules that apply to other modes of communication? So let's dissect this question. They're basically saying that Part 97 has rules, including rules for third-party. So we talked about the restrictions, what a third-party can and cannot do. So they're asking us, under what circumstances, if you're doing a digital mode, are you exempt from those Part 97 third-party rules? So again, it's a trick question, because under no circumstances. In other words, those Part 97 third-party rules always apply. So, bit of a trick question, but straightforward answer. Just know that there are no exemptions to those third-party Part 97 rules. So, we have come to the end of our slides in the slide deck, and we have also come to the end of our question pool review. I said normally we would wait until our next class to do our question pool review, give you a little time to soak in the material and then go and come again. However, just a few questions, so we decided to go through it quickly so we don't have to have another class just to go through some question pool questions. And just a couple closing remarks. First of all, certainly like to thank, we do have several licensed amateur radio operators in our class. Very thankful to have them. And some would have participated in this special event in Trinidad and Tobago's independence using the special event called sign 9 Yankee 59 India November Delta. I'd like to say thanks to everyone for their participation who were able to participate. And we encourage persons who have participated to consider applying for the special commemorative certificate by going to this website here, 9 Yankee 59 India November Delta India November Foxtrot Oscar, 9Y59IND.info. And you can check out that website, even though you don't intend to apply for the certificate. We do have some information inside of there now that the event has come and gone. We have some graphics, some videos, and a couple other things that will be a bit of memorabilia for the time being as to what took place. So persons in the class, feel free to check out the website. And you can also leave a comment if you wish inside of there. There's room for feedback, but some videos that you can look at as well. Some of the activities, some of the actual QSOs or transmissions that took place, as well as screenshots of the SSTV sessions, certificates that were issued. So spend a little time on the website and hopefully it will be helpful. And why I'm saying that to folks is that really and truly this class is geared towards light touch theory, and we have been exam focused. But really and truly, when you get your license, when we become licensed amateur radio operators, the learning has really and truly just begun. It's just like your driver's permit. You sit the exam and you have your driver's permit, but you're really just learning to drive. You're getting the experience now. So as amateur radio operators, try to absorb, even though everything may not necessarily be clear cut as you look at it, but start to absorb. So that's why I'm recommending take a look at this website and you'll start to absorb some of the lingo and some of the language and some of the practices. You'll start to absorb those things as you go, because there's a whole lot under amateur radio. So this site is up. I encourage you to take a look at it. So of course, notwithstanding today being our last session, we are still open to any questions from any of the participants. You can send an email, you can send a WhatsApp. And also, please just keep in touch. You know, we'd like to hear from you, how you're doing, especially as you take the exams. We know several persons from the technician class have taken the exams. I think everyone has been successful. I'm yet to hear someone who was not or was not successful, so we congratulate them. And we did have at least one student in the general class who actually ran ahead and took the exam, I think, when we were about halfway there, a student in the US. And we say congratulations to him. He was successful. And of course, for this general class session, we actually had over 250 participants, almost twice, more than twice as what we had in the technician level. And you know, this was really overwhelming. And we say thank you to everyone. And most persons actually stayed the course to the end. So we will be sending an email to everyone with a link for you to fill out for your participation certificate. So we did promise persons to send, if you attended 75% of the sessions, you would be entitled to apply for a certificate of participation. So we will send that via the next email, the link to the form where you just fill out the information. You'll include how you want your name to appear on the certificate as well. And once you fill that out, within some short time, we will produce the certificates and email them out to you. Again, once you attended 75% of the session. So of course, persons will say, well, what if we had issues attending? So as long as you look at the session, and we will take your word for it, once you look at the session and you have attended 75% of those sessions, whether live or through the on-demand, we will take your word that you have in fact attended. Feel free to apply and we will issue you your certificate of participation. Because we know that many persons had challenges. Some persons are not able to actually be live on a Friday for religious reasons, for example. So we don't want to leave anybody out. And we had persons who had things like work and other conflicts. But if you were able to, on the YouTube, check out the recordings afterwards as they were emailed to you, and we have quite a few students who did that, then you will be eligible to receive a certificate of participation as well. So it's open to all. And of course, the next steps will be exam taking. So we will expect to have local exams in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, participants in your local jurisdiction, check with your regional authorities, your local amateur radio clubs, for when exams will be. And of course, we always have the option for the remote online exams, where exams are happening just about every day. So If you need a refresher on what exams are about, how you go about it, the websites and so on, just take a look at the orientation session, session number 1. So we don't have to rehash all of that. Most of, if not all of those details are in the orientation session. Please have a look. But if you have any questions still, please email or send a WhatsApp. So of course, when you become licensed, we certainly do look forward to hearing you on the various amateur radio bands and having a talk, a QSO, a conversation with you as you become licensed. And remember, when you get your license, if you don't have equipment immediately, there are several things that you can do to become operational. Echolink, remember we had dealt with that in one of the sessions. That's something that you can download and utilize with a smartphone or computer right away to get on the air, because Echolink interfaces with radio equipment as well. So once you have your license, you can be authenticated. So check it out, Echolink. Even though you don't have any radio equipment yet, you can still become operational. That's one of the options that's available to you. There are several others like Peanut and Dudestar and Droidstar and so on. But we will have also, after these sessions, we have been having a couple of radio operating practices and tip sessions in between, and everyone who has been on the mailing list will be invited to attend. As we said, when we become licensed amateur radio operators, we have just begun to learn, really. We are all still learning, and we will be facilitating sessions in TNT as it becomes possible to have practical in-person sessions. We'll be letting you know about those. Also the conferences that we intend to have as part of the REACT system. You will all be welcome to be part of that training and get more into the practical aspects of operations, where experienced radio operators will be sharing how they operate. And that's beyond the theory, beyond the exams, right? Also, just want to say to persons, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. Take a look at these 2 links. The technician class, all 16 sessions are there, and we'll have all 24 sessions of the general class. These are the quick links to get to the on-demand version of this course. I would be curious to know how many persons are interested in doing the extra class, or what we call the amateur extra level. So please send an email, send a WhatsApp if you're interested in us facilitating. Please let us know of your interest if you would like to do that level with us. Also, even if you're not licensed yet and you're interested in hearing what HF, the high frequency bands, sound like, please check out a software-defined receiver that's online at this URL. You can check it out and get familiar, and you can tune any frequency in the HF spectrum and listen. Also, just a little plug for REACT as well. We haven't been talking too much about REACT during our training session. I think we did it during the orientation, but we haven't really been talking much about it. There's a little article on the Catholic News website about REACT, so persons who are interested in finding out a bit more about REACT, you can take a look at this URL as well, a fairly recent article that's published. So I would like to say thank you to everyone for your participation, for staying the course. There's a world of discovery that still awaits. There's much, much more under amateur radio. I would like to thank everyone. I mean, it has really been an overwhelming response. Certainly the licensed hams who were part of the class and helped as well during the Q&A. We had persons like John and Franz, for instance, who were regularly giving us updates, different perspectives and information from practical experience, and several others as well. So we thank all of the participants for your questions during the sessions. And we trust that at the end of the day, everyone will consider taking the exam. You're not obligated to, but we really hope that you would. And we also trust that you would represent well as amateur radio operators. We hope that all of us will become great examples of amateur radio operators. All right, so thank you so much, everyone, for staying the course, for your participation. We know some of these sessions have extended beyond, like today. We are more than a half an hour beyond our usual time limit. We thank you for your extra time. We thank you for participating, for studying, and looking forward to you becoming all amateur radio operators, being licensed. So folks, do have a good night. Take good care. Be safe and do have a great weekend. And we look forward to keeping in touch. We will let you know about upcoming sessions that you may choose to participate in. So with that, folks, thank you and do have a good night. Okay, thank you very much, Franz. I really appreciate your feedback. Yes, certainly, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for the kind words. Again, you have been part of this and made this possible. You too, dear John, adios, 73. Thank you so much for your kind participation, advice, answers. Really, it's been helpful. You guys were all part of this and made this possible. Thanks a lot, Roger. Good night as well. You're certainly welcome. Yes, it was a pleasure to do it. And Sylvester, thank you also. Good night. And certainly a pleasure. And 73 to you also. And Adish, all right, have a good night. 73. Yes, Peanut as an app. So check it out. One of those apps that you can use on your smartphone or computer. And you don't have to have a radio to get involved. Of course, the idea is try and get a radio at some point. Or radios. All right. Gary, certainly, thank you so much for the kind remarks. It's been a pleasure for me also doing these sessions with you all. It's been great company. Adish, also, good night. Take care. Ramzan, good night as well. Also, you take good care. All right. Yes, Adish, we will be announcing the exams. So we will email out to persons, also persons who are on the WhatsApp groups like the Zello groups and so on, Zello channels. It will be announced there. You're certainly welcome. And yes, you're quite correct there. Franz talking about DigiPeating, Packet BBS, All-Star Nodes, Echolink, all unattended. Yes, WinLink, RMS also unattended. Yes, so very good examples there. All right, Anthony, thank you so much. Arvind, yes, all right, thanks for the feedback. Jermaine, also. Adish again. Anthony, Ramzan, okay. Jeff, and I think Nancy as well. Thank you so much. Arvind, Jermaine. All right, we had you there again. Franz, Adish, see who else. Okay. Sharina as well, good night. Natasha also, good night. Right, just scrolling through here, looking at the messages. You're certainly welcome there, Jermaine. You're certainly welcome. And yes, I look forward to you doing the exam also. I'm sure you'll be successful. Thank you for your kind remarks. Yasmin and Cyril, also, thank you so much for participating. Great to have you there. And thank you for your kind feedback. Roger, 73 also. Arvind, you're certainly welcome. Do have yourself a good night. Okay, Adish, yes. So look out for the exams. And Jermaine, yes, well, once you get the equipment repaired, well, that's fantastic there, Jermaine. Anthony, yes, it's a journey of knowledge for all of us. And I like the point of enlightenment. I think we all would have learned something going through the course and the journey. Victor, good night as well. Say hello to Marlene as well. And yes, it's been a pleasure, I think, for me, time well spent. So folks, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. Take good care now, and we will all keep in touch. Pleasant night. 7-3. Okay, Anthony, well, thanks for the feedback. So looking forward to the extra. Well, yeah, we certainly consider planning doing it as well. So folks, please feel free to give the feedback if you're interested. You know how many persons are interested. Let's see. And we will look to possibly schedule it a little later on in the course of the year. Take a little break from these sessions and then reschedule and go hard at it. So sure, will do, Anthony. Thank you so much. You too, June. You take good care and be safe. All the best.